Tharoor, your address has greatly enriched our understanding of the Indian migration. You've put everything in perspective very effectively for us, so thank you for that. Ladies and gentlemen, can we please start this Q&A session with a round of applause for one of the most eloquent, well-spoken, and a politician who really doesn't hesitate from speaking his mind. The recent things that have happened, I'm going to ask a question on that. But sir, you touched upon on the issue of illegal migration, and so I want to start this Q&A with that. Just the other day, saw a video tweeted out by White House. The video was focused on those handcuffs and the chains with which they were tying the legs of those illegal immigrants. They don't even call them immigrants, they call them illegal aliens. And then that video was, quote, retweeted by Elon Musk with a comment, wow. So my question to you, Dr. Tharoor, you've been in the space of international diplomacy for a very long time. Sending those people back who are illegal immigrants is understandable. But to be sending them back in a manner which is so demeaning to the human spirit, is that an accepted thing?
No, it's not acceptable. And as I said, both Colombia and Mexico refused to accept it. They said that they would not allow their citizens to be treated that way, and I believe we should take the same stand. I don't know whether the Prime Minister did so behind closed doors when he was in Washington, but the fact that a couple more flights have continued with the men still handcuffed and shackled, at least after the first flight, the women were no longer treated this way, but still it really was pretty shameful. And this dehumanization is really not necessary. Once they've left American soil, why do they need to do this? To my mind, this is a completely unnecessary development on the part of those who really ought to know better. If America values its relationship with India, then they've made their political point to their domestic MAGA audience by issuing this video. They should cease and desist forthwith. And what is more, we should insist on that. There's now an interesting development. They started sending these planes to Panama and Costa Rica instead of sending them directly to India.
Yeah.
And therefore there might be some intermediate process when their deportation is screened through there, and then maybe it'll happen thereafter in commercial aircrafts or chartered aircraft rather than military ones, and maybe it will no longer involve all of this. But I think we should insist on bringing that about, because to my mind this is an insult to us as a nation as well. It's not just the dehumanizing of our citizens as an insult to us as a nation. We shouldn't take it, and we should tell them this is not the act of a friendly country. We don't condone what they've done. They shouldn't have gone illegally, but nonetheless, send them back with decency, with some dignity. They're our people.
Dr. Tharoor, the BJP turns around and says that we've actually been taking this far too long. And in 2011, and I was reading some articles, in 2011, the government of Dr. Manmohan Singh was cornered exactly on this issue because there were Indian students who had radio collars around their ankles, and that's how America decided on tracking or keeping a track on them. And, you know, Dr. Manmohan Singh had to defend all of that. The accusation was this is the love that Dr. Manmohan Singh has shown for Bush and for America, and look at how they are treating our students. So this has been going on for a long time.
The radio collars were slightly less dehumanizing than shackles and handcuffs, which is much worse. I'll tell you why, because I mean, this is a standard practice in America when, for example, a convict has parole and is essentially able to be at home. They just want to make sure the radio collar means that they don't escape the jurisdiction of the cops. That's all this is. But I'm not excusing any of this. I just feel that right now, they've done something wrong. Send them back, no problem. Send them back as soon as you catch them. We don't mind, as long as their identity is confirmed they really are our citizens. But don't treat them in this dehumanizing way. If you must handcuff them until you put them on a plane, even that is happening on your soil because you want to make sure they don't escape in your country. Maybe we can accept that. But once they're on the plane, take the blessed handcuffs off and let them come as regular passengers. This is silly and insulting.
Dr. Tharoor, what really intrigues me, and I guess what the moot question here is what has changed in the last few years that you were quoting a number, you know, in your address. You said in 2018, the number of people who were illegally moving from India to US was somewhere around 8,000. The numbers increased to 96,000 in 2022-23. What has changed?
I think a number of things have happened. Frankly, one of the problems is that our people's aspirations have not been matched by our success stories at home. We talk about economic growth, but it's been largely jobless growth. And young people coming of age and finding they don't have jobs available are the ones who are trying to leave, for the most part. Not everybody, like the middle-class family that froze to death. They were not just young, but by and large, this is number one. Number two, as usual, the sharks have leapt into the waters, and the unscrupulous agents have decided this is a great opportunity to make money. The ones who went earlier and who remained, for the most part, those who went legally, of course, were success stories in places like Silicon Valley. Those who went illegally were amnestied. There have been 3 or 4 waves of amnesty in the US in the last 25, 30 years. And then these people are succeeding and sending money back, and when they visit, they're visiting sort of clad in the latest designer outfits and having lots of money, dollars to spare. That suddenly has sent some gleams up in people's eyes. So there's a self-reinforcing element that the success of earlier migrants encourages newer migrants. And thirdly, there is undoubtedly, I think, a genuine problem in some specific states where there just aren't enough opportunities. In Punjab, the young people are essentially expected to make a living on farms that can't sustain them. And so for them, essentially, they're saying, let's go. I mean, some are staying behind and doing drugs, which is much worse in some ways than trying to risk migration. But if they have any money, or they can sell their land, which is not giving them enough of an income, and make money, they're spending it getting their passage to Panama or Mexico or Canada and then trying to come in. So all of these factors have happened. I did a piece about this a couple of, well, more than a couple of months ago, late last year, for an international syndicate, and I had all the figures at that time. 725,000 is a Pew Research Center estimate of just 2020, so it's gone up since then.
Right.
The UN Population Fund has an estimate which is much higher than the official estimate of the government of India for the number of people leaving India. I think we've claimed a figure like about 900,000 leaving every year. The numbers are much higher.
Okay.
And the problem, therefore, is that if the rest of the world thinks there are more Indians leaving, legally, illegally, and everything else, we do have to ask ourselves, as a country, what we can do to set that right. Not by restricting immigration. In any case, people will never tell you the truth. What they'll do is they'll say they're going on a student visa, or they'll say they're going on a tourist visa to a particular neighboring country. How many Indians really want to be tourists in Panama or Mexico? But they go. Yeah. And then they quietly pay for the so-called donkey route and go in really hazardous conditions into America.
Yeah. But Dr. Saab, staying with the issue of migration, one final question on this aspect that I want to take is about the India-Canada equation. You'd agree, Dr. Tharoor, that the equation between the two countries is perhaps at its all-time low at this moment, at least till Prime Minister Trudeau was around. There are a lot of students, lots of Indian students who are finishing their studies in Canada. They all find themselves caught in this conundrum. How does the country, balance its national interest on one side with the interest of the citizens on the other? My question to you, Dr. Tharoor, had you been handling the Ministry of External Affairs, what would you have done differently to not reach a situation like this today between India and Canada?
With Canada, I mean, I'm in regular touch with the foreign minister, and I have some sympathy for the very tough line that India has taken. Because, while we respect Canada and we respect their freedom of speech and their traditions, which in some ways are different from ours, and they permit, for example, open advocacy of secession, which we don't in our country. So the Free Quebec movement can freely preach that they should secede from Canada, and they're allowed to do that. We don't allow that.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, to condone and permit certain elements on their soil to not just preach but plan and execute murder and mayhem in India is unforgivable. And it goes right back to the Khalistani bombing of the Air India Kanishk aircraft in 1985. To this day, nobody has been punished for it. The Canadians ran such a botched inquiry that it's impossible to have any respect for their law enforcement or their judicial process. You can't have people who publicly gloated and celebrated and took credit for the killings of all these innocent Indians and Canadians who are allowed to go scot-free and thrive in that place. So, I mean, the Canadians have been pretty feckless. On top of that, we've unfortunately seen a situation where, yes, this particular government and prime minister has had some dependence on elements that are openly sympathizers of Khalistan extremism. And I say extremism because we have to accept that it is not illegal to preach secession in Canada. But it is certainly illegal to plan and execute and order murder. And they've been doing that. And that's something which we simply can't allow. We've been trying, for example, to extradite a dozen people from there. We're not able to bring them. And there is a lot of political pandering to the worst elements in Canada. So, for example, anybody who served in the Indian Army or the police and applies for even a tourist visa to Canada is denied on the grounds that if you're in the Indian Army or police, you're guilty of human rights abuses. What nonsense is this? I mean, these are insulting stands for a government to take, and I don't blame our government for saying we're not going to accept that. Equally, I think that on the people-to-people level, the relations are excellent. Trade with Canada, I think, is as high as 50 billion. It's going very well. There's no particular problem there. It is only, unfortunately, now at the government-to-government, and particularly over the issue specifically of the Khalistan terrorist attacks that have been based on their soil and that have been conducted, sadly, with some complicity on the part of lax law enforcement. And this is the way most Indians see it, and they do believe it's wrong. But we have not prevented our students from going there. And if students find that it's, for example, cheaper to study in Canada than in North America, but it gives them all the advantages of a North American degree, and gives them even the opportunity to work in both countries.
That's right.
Very often people with a Canadian degree and Canadian status are allowed to work in America. All of that makes Canada very attractive to them. The challenge for us now is we don't want to stand in the way of our kids' aspirations, but we certainly want to ensure that those aspirations do not justify mistreatment by the government of our national interests. So we have to stand up for our national interests too.
So we are hoping with the leadership change, maybe the things get better between the two countries. Now, we've spoken adequately about the issue of migration, Dr. Tharoor. Let me take a few political questions with your permission now. First of all, Dr. Tharoor, tell me, after a fairly encouraging performance in 2024 general elections, the Congress party seems to have hit a slippery slope that's consistently taking the party down. Whether it was Haryana, whether it's Maharashtra, now Delhi. What worked for you in 2024 May and June, which is not working for you anymore, Dr. Tharoor?
Well, first of all, you have to understand that in India, frankly, we have not just one nation, but we also have 28 states and a few union territories, and each have their own political histories, their own political character, and their own political realities. And therefore, what works in a national election often is a message that gets transmuted very differently at the state level. And the Indian voters, by and large, have become sophisticated enough to choose differently when it comes to nation and state. Secondly, as you know, there have been some concerns expressed that the media hasn't been entirely fair. I mean, I think Sachin Pilot today was pointing out that, well, a lot of attention was paid to the seats lost in Rajasthan. There were 11 seats the Congress won at the expense of the BJP, and those were not mentioned by the media, and so on and so forth. So you're really looking at a situation where the story is not as simple, not as black and white as your question portrayed it.
Okay.
I think, obviously, every party believes it can bounce back, and I think as long as Congress learns the right lessons from these experiences and takes the right steps, we still have a positive
Dr.
future.
Tharoor, put your hand on your heart and tell me, do you think the current leadership in Congress, which is Mr. Rahul Gandhi and partly Priyanka Vadra, will ever be able to put the party back in power?
Look,
I'm so sorry to interrupt, sir, but if this could be a brief answer, because we are out of time, and again, I extend my apologies, but we are out of time. So a quick comment.
I'm not the one
That's my
asking
last
the
question, Radhika. That's my last
Thank you.
question, but yeah.
So then my answer would be we are out of time, Megha. We'll talk about this some more. No, I mean, obviously we believe we'll do fine. The right circumstances, and the right states, at the right time, and there is, the good thing about India is there's an election every 6 months somewhere or the other. Give us a chance to prove ourselves. Thank you very much.
Bye.